No one goes to the MLK, Junior Beloved Community Awards expecting a moment like this. You go expecting dignity, measured applause, carefully chosen words that sit comfortably inside the long shadow of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. You go expecting unity so carefully choreographed that nothing sharp, nothing unscripted, nothing disruptive is allowed to breathe. But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And yet, that night, something slipped through. Not loud, not chaotic, not even angry, just precise. It happened quickly enough that some people missed it entirely. Slowly enough that others felt it before they understood it. A phrase, delivered on stage, in a room built on symbolism and restraint. A phrase that didn't belong there. Or maybe, more unsettling, it belonged there more than anyone wanted to admit. Here's the uncomfortable question we have to start with. Was this a mistake? Or was it a message? Because when Anika Noni rose and Aldis Hodge stepped out as hosts that evening, nothing about the setup suggested controversy. These weren't reckless provocateurs. These weren't internet personalities chasing viral heat. These were respected, disciplined performers. Artists known for control, intention, and an almost stubborn professionalism. People like that don't usually slip. And they definitely don't slip on a stage like that. Especially not with millions watching, phones recording, and reputations quietly balanced on every syllable. The phrase itself, Yacht Princess, landed softly. No raised voice. No smirk. No theatrical pause to underline it. Which somehow made it worse. Or more serious. Or more deliberate. It passed through the room like a temperature change. Subtle, but impossible to ignore once you felt it. Some laughed. Briefly. Unsure if they were supposed to. Some froze. Some glanced sideways, searching other faces for permission to react. And some, later, would say they felt the room split in two. What makes this moment matter isn't the insult itself, if that's even the right word. It's where it happened, and who said it, and who it was said about. Because the name hovering behind that phrase, even when it wasn't spoken directly, carries its own gravity. Meghan Markle is not just a celebrity. She's a symbol, whether people want her to be or not. To some, she represents modern disruption. To others, media manipulation. To others still, something more personal, resentment, projection, fatigue. You don't invoke a figure like that accidentally at an event designed to honor moral clarity. And you certainly don't do it unless you're prepared for the consequences. This is where the story stops being about a joke or an insult and starts becoming something else. A moment of cultural friction, a quiet rebellion, or possibly a line being drawn by people who rarely draw lines in public. Ask yourself this. Why here? Why now? Why in a room dedicated to Dr. King's vision of dignity and collective responsibility would two hosts risk destabilizing the atmosphere with a phrase that clearly carried baggage? Because timing matters. Context matters. And this wasn't a random award show drifting into chaos. This was a carefully curated space. Every word vetted. Every beat rehearsed. Every transition smooth. Until it wasn't. And that's where the unease begins to creep in. The first few seconds after the phrase were telling. There was no immediate correction. No nervous laugh followed by a walk back. No apology disguised as humor. Instead, there was momentum. The program continued. The hosts moved on, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Which raises another unsettling possibility. What if this wasn't a rupture? What if it was a signal? Because seasoned presenters know when they've crossed a line. You can see it in their eyes. You can hear it in the quick self-correction, the subtle tightening of tone. None of that happened here. Instead, there was composure. Calm. Control. The kind of control that suggests preparation. And that's when the audience at home, those rewatching clips, those slowing the footage down, those replaying the line over and over, started asking a different question. Who was this really for? Was it for the room? Was it for the viewers? Or was it aimed somewhere else entirely, toward a person, a circle, an industry that understood the subtext immediately? Because phrases like that don't exist in a vacuum. They carry histories, rumors, online shorthand, whispers that never quite make it into formal spaces. Until suddenly, they do. And when they do, the reaction isn't outrage first. It's recognition. That's why this story matters right now. Not because of celebrity drama. Not because of insult culture. but because something unspoken crossed into a space that's usually sealed off from it. A space that prides itself on moral authority and collective purpose. And once that seal breaks, even slightly, it raises uncomfortable questions. Are these institutions still neutral? Are they still protected? Or are they becoming arenas where long-simmering frustrations finally find a microphone? What happened on that stage didn't explode in the moment. It lingered. It followed people out of the room. Into hallways. Into after-parties. Into private conversations that, until then, had stayed private. And here's the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. The loudest reaction didn't come from the audience. It came afterward. From the silences. From the statements that never came. From the careful non-responses. From the way certain people suddenly became unavailable for comment. That's usually where the real story lives. But to understand why that phrase landed the way it did, and why it may have been far more calculated than it first appeared, we have to rewind. Back to the stage. Back to the mood in the room. Back to the moment just before everything shifted. Because what led up to that line matters just as much as the line itself. And once you see how carefully the ground was prepared, it becomes much harder to believe this was accidental. But the most revealing detail? It wasn't what was said on stage. It was what happened in the seconds after the applause faded. And that's where this story really begins. So let's go back. Not to the phrase itself, but to the seconds before it. Because that's where intent usually reveals itself, not in what people say, but in how they arrive there. Here's the question that kept coming up in conversations afterward, whispered more than spoken. Was this planned? Not scripted in the traditional sense. No cue cards flashing, say something controversial now. Nothing that crude. But planned in the way seasoned professionals plan moments. The way you decide what you won't say, and then choose the one line you will. The MLK, Junior Beloved Community Awards, are not loose events. They are tight, carefully paced. Every presenter briefed, not just on timing, but on tone. This isn't a space where people improvise freely. This is a room built on trust. Trust that the message will remain bigger than the messenger. That night, the room felt exactly like that at first. Calm, polished, almost reverent. The lighting was warm, deliberate. The kind of lighting that softens edges, smooths faces, makes everything feel intentional. The audience wasn't restless. No buzz of anticipation for drama. This wasn't that kind of crowd. It was donors, activists, industry leaders, artists, people who understand decorum as a language. And then Anika Noni rose and Aldis Hodge walked out. Here's where it gets interesting. If you know their work, you know their rhythm. They're not flashy hosts. They don't mug for the camera. They don't chase applause. They deliver lines the way you deliver facts you're confident in. Calm, grounded, measured, which is exactly how they began. The opening remarks were safe. That's not an insult. It's an observation. Safe in the way that tells you the hosts understand the weight of the room. Acknowledging the legacy. Thanking organizers. Setting expectations. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow. If anything, it lulled the audience into certainty. This is going to be smooth. And that's often when people stop listening closely. But if you rewatch the footage, and many people did, repeatedly, there's a subtle shift that happens about a minute in. It's not obvious. No dramatic pause. No change in posture. It's more like a recalibration. A tightening. Their cadence changes slightly. Still controlled, but slower. As if they're choosing each word more carefully now. As if something is being set up. You can see it most clearly in the eye contact. They start scanning the room differently. Not broadly, not casually. More focused. As if checking whether certain people are present. Or whether certain absences have been noted. Ask yourself this. Have you ever watched someone speak and felt that they were no longer talking to everyone? That's what some attendees later described. The sense that the words were suddenly directional. Still, nothing overt. No red flags. The audience stayed with them. Heads nodded. A few smiles. Polite laughter in the expected places. And then came the moment everyone would later rewind to. Not the phrase yet. The breath before it. It's subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. A fractional pause. Not long enough to be dramatic, but long enough to matter. The kind of pause people make when they're about to cross from the expected into something riskier. This is important. Professionals pause like that when they know a line will land differently than the others. And then it came. Delivered cleanly, calmly, almost casually. Yacht princess. No emphasis. No wink. No flourish. Just 2 words. Here's where the room changed. Not erupted. Changed. There's a difference. Laughter did happen, but it wasn't unified. It came in pockets. A few sharp exhalations. A couple of delayed chuckles that felt more like reflex than amusement. And then silence. A strange, uneven silence that didn't quite know how long it was supposed to last. Some people clapped. Late. As if applause were a safe default when uncertainty hits. Others didn't move at all. You can spot them in the wide shots. Hands folded. Brows slightly furrowed. The kind of expression people wear when they're processing something they didn't expect to have to process. Because everyone in that room understood something immediately. That phrase wasn't neutral. But what exactly did it mean? That's where interpretation fractured. For some, it was a jab. A cutting one, but still a jab. A moment of pointed humor aimed at Meghan Markle, whose name, though unspoken, hovered unmistakably behind the words. In certain circles, yacht princess isn't random slang. It carries layers, whispers, internet shorthand, long-running speculation that rarely breaches polite conversation. For others, it was worse than a joke. It was a declaration, a refusal to maintain the usual silence. The kind of coded language that only works if you assume your audience will understand the reference without explanation. And that assumption matters, because it suggests the host believed enough people in that room, and watching at home, already knew what was being implied. Which raises a deeply uncomfortable question. When did that become acceptable on a stage like this? Because remember where we are. This isn't a late-night monologue. This isn't a comedy roast. This is a ceremony rooted in moral legacy. One that trades on the authority of Dr. King's vision of dignity, fairness, and collective responsibility. You don't casually insert coded social commentary here unless you're making a point. And yet, no one interrupted. No one rushed out to course correct. No backstage producer cut the mic or waved frantically. The program just continued. That's the part people gloss over, but it's critical. If this line had truly crossed an unanticipated boundary, there would have been a reaction. These events have safety nets. People whose job it is to manage optics in real time. Silence is not their instinct. Unless the silence itself is strategic. Unless no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge what had just happened. Because acknowledging it would mean naming it. And naming it would mean choosing a side. Watch the hosts immediately after the line. There's no panic. No tightening of the jaw. No quick glance off stage. Their composure holds. Almost serenely. That's not how people behave when they think they've made a mistake. That's how people behave when they've delivered exactly what they intended to deliver. Which brings us back to intent. Were they speaking for themselves? Or were they channeling something larger, something that's been simmering quietly in elite spaces for a while now? Here's something else that's easy to miss. They didn't follow the phrase with explanation. No clarifying joke. No context. No attempt to guide interpretation. They let it hang. That's a power move. Because when you explain a line, you take responsibility for how it's received. When you don't, you force the audience to fill in the blanks themselves. And people will always fill blanks with what they already believe. That's why reactions were so fractured. Some viewers online dismissed it as a harmless quip blown out of proportion. Others zeroed in immediately, pulling clips, dissecting body language, reading subtext like it was a Rorschach test. But inside the room, something more telling happened. Conversations stalled. People leaned toward each other, whispering, not laughing, not debating loudly, but murmuring. The kind of murmuring that signals shared discomfort or shared understanding. Have you ever been in a space where something is said that everyone understands, but no one wants to acknowledge? That's the atmosphere witnesses described. And here's the detail that keeps resurfacing, even now. No one publicly objected. No boos. No walkouts. No visible outrage. Which, paradoxically, made the moment louder. Because outrage would have framed the line as unacceptable. Silence allowed it to sit in a gray area. A space where it could be interpreted as commentary rather than insult. And gray areas are dangerous in moments like this. They invite speculation. They invite pattern seeking. They invite the question that, once asked, is hard to put back. Is this how the conversation is changing? Is this a signal that certain protections, social, institutional, symbolic, are eroding? Because if someone can be referenced this way, here, by people this respected, without immediate consequence, what does that say about the broader shift happening behind closed doors? The applause that followed was polite, but thinner, less enthusiastic. Something had changed in the energy. The program moved on, but not everyone did. Later that night, attendees would describe a feeling they couldn't quite articulate at the time. A sense that they'd witnessed something transitional. Not explosive, but directional. Like a door cracking open. And once doors crack open, things tend to come through. But the most revealing part of this chapter isn't the phrase, or even the reaction in the room. It's what didn't happen next. No apology. No clarification. No statement from the hosts walking it back. No quick PR release smoothing edges. Instead, there was quiet. A very deliberate quiet. And that silence, carefully maintained, would end up speaking louder than anything said on stage. Because when people choose silence in moments like this, it's rarely because they don't know what to say. It's because saying something would reveal more than they're ready to reveal. And that leads us to the next layer of this story. Because Yacht Princess didn't come from nowhere. It carries baggage. History, meaning that doesn't originate on that stage. To understand why those two words landed the way they did, and why they may have been chosen so carefully, we have to step away from the podium and look at what's been building beneath the surface for a long time. What the phrase taps into, and why, suddenly, it was allowed into the room. But that part of the story doesn't live on stage. It lives in the context everyone pretended not to see. And that's where things start getting far more uncomfortable.